We continue with the back and forth between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. The DA's federal chairperson, Helen Zille, maintains the government of national unity has provided a fig leaf for President Cyril Ramaphosa to hide the real governance structure, which is a coalition government between the ANC and DA. Zille made the comments during a freedom dialogue hosted by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. Joining us to unpack both the input of Helen Zille at the dialogue and ANC Secretary General Fick response to some of her statements is Angelo Fick, Orwell Socio-Economic Research Institute Director. Good afternoon, Angelo. Thank you very much for joining us on The Full View. So just as expected, Helen Zille's statements have ruffled some feathers, but also seen some praising her for stating what they believe was the obvious on the GNU. What are your views on her statement that the president knew a co-governing arrangement with the DA would only be palatable if it was presented as a government of national unity, when in actual fact, according to her, they're in a coalition?
So this is a coalition government. It contains various parties. Zille seems to think that it is mainly between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. And we've seen the ANC's response to that way back when the letters got leaked before the announcement of the Government of National Unity, when Mr. Ramaphosa indicated that there are other parties who are partners. We've even had some of those parties indicated that it wasn't a matter of who signed first, it was a matter of technological circulation of the various documents. It is important to note that Ms. Zille is speaking at a liberal organization's, German Liberal Party's, foundation in South Africa. And so these remarks have to be taken in the context in which that is being made. So I think Ms. Zille has to save some face from that scathing letter that was leaked, in which she wasn't even named, but indicated as federal chairperson, and that of Director Generals not being kept but being appointed by the new ministers was seen as legally incompetent, to quote the letter. And also Mr. Ramaphosa reminded Mr. Steenhuisen and thereby Ms. Zille that actually people serve in cabinet at the president's appointment. Cabinet, they have to present, as cabinet ministers, they have to present government positions, government policy. And so my sense is that Ms. Zille is trying to wrestle back some of the control that she felt she had when she was doing the road shows around the media immediately after the election results. But in real terms, the Democratic Alliance has to face the fact that it has, in numerical terms, fewer voters in this election than in the last election, even though the percentage of the vote electorate increased. And that decrease in 2019 led to the exit of
Mmusi Maimane. But then it seems as though, pardon me for interjecting there, Angelo, but it seems as though the Democratic Alliance is of the view that your influence within the GNU must be proportional to the votes you garnered during the elections. And they're feeling that if that is in fact the case, or should be the case, then they still are more powerful within the GNU after the ANC, of course.
Well, we know that that isn't how politics works. Politics is about what it is you can negotiate in the moment in those committees, behind the scenes, and what are the policy compromises that you've agreed to in order to join the Government of National Unity. We know that there have been, that the successes they called for immediately after the election, they didn't get. They got ministries that they didn't call for. They didn't get the ministries they wanted. They wanted more ministries than they were given. So in that sense, I think they're underestimating Mr. Ramaphosa and the ANC, and I think many people do. So even at 40% of the electorate, people forget that Mr. Ramaphosa was part of the team that negotiated the National Party and F.W. de Klerk out of power in the early 90s. And F.W. de Klerk had the South African Defence Force backing him up.
And if proportionality is anything to go by, the ANC still got more than what they garnered in the election. In fact, when you look at the Government of National Unity now, they have more ministers than what ordinarily they would have gotten if they just stuck to the 40%. But on Helen Zille, some say she's actually quite a smart politician. People mustn't assume that things just slip out of her tongue. She is intentional, and what we're seeing is her reminding the core voter base that they haven't lost their identity. They will not be cannibalized by the ANC, and that the goal or plan to topple the ANC is still on course. Would you say it was deliberate, that in that dialogue she said exactly what she wanted to say because she needs or feels they must constantly remind their electorate or their voter base that they have not now switched and are more sympathetic towards the ANC?
So that is certainly the case, that Ms. Zille's remarks are not accidental slips of the tongue. She does not fire off easily. And in that sense, Mr. Mbalula is much more of a loose cannon. But the difficulty that I think Ms. Zille faces and the Democratic Alliance faces is that they can't just consolidate and remind the existing voters from the 2024 election. If they wish to become the government in future, they need to grow. And I'm not certain that a politician in her 70s, with the complicated record of Ms. Zille and a party as mired in controversy as the Democratic Alliance, and with its dwindling but lower support in this election, are necessarily well poised in order to 2029 as the return to victory. My sense is that many people in the DA have made remarks that seem quite at odds with what the majority of South Africans have professed, that they want a social democracy, they want redress, they want greater equality, and much of what Ms. Zille has said and what the party has stood for counter what people are demanding. And in that sense, my understanding is that Ms. Zille is perhaps out of touch with the majority of South Africans, and that includes what was their base in the 2000s, which has shifted further to the right and started voting for the Freedom Plus and other parties, which is what their own internal report told them in 2019.
Now, Angelo, this is all taking place as the ANC sits in Birchwood reflecting on the election's outcome. But already we heard yesterday the Secretary-General reading the Riot Act to party members who are already preoccupied with succession beyond 2027. Can the ANC honestly rid itself of this culture? I remember Thabo Mbeki once actually spoke about this, saying, you know what, if you're constantly preoccupied with leadership, you are further dividing the party and shifting from the main focus or the main intention why the ANC was founded, which was to serve society.
Absolutely. And the organization has recognized that people have joined the party. This is in January 8th statement after January 8th statement over the last decade, and in various reports, for reasons other than political, for financial and other forms of gain, for network gains, for influence gains. The party also has the problem of having to bring back those alienated KwaZulu-Natal constituents who left the 2022 conference so unhappy. And then my sense is also that as its share of the electorate support dwindles or goes down, and its positions in government dwindles, operating as a patronage network is going to start falling apart. We've seen this in places like Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela Bay. As Samkhele Maseko pointed out, once you lose those metros in a fast urbanizing country, you are losing people. And not focusing on government, not focusing on delivery, not focusing on administration, but focusing on internal party politics is partly what has weakened the African National Congress's ability to do what it did in 94, in 99, and in 2004, which is to have that machinery go into the country and convince ordinary South Africans to support it.
Angelo, a pleasure to speak with you this evening. That's all Socioeconomic Research Institute Director Angelo Fick.